Welcome to Your Care, Your Choice, a podcast by Community Nurse. Over the past 100 years, we have prided ourselves on continually evolving and developing new and exciting initiatives to better serve you and your families. This podcast is one of our more recent examples. I am your host, Dr. Todd Hayes, physical therapist. This episode, we'd like to talk to you about something we call foundational documents. As with many of our topics, most people do not think about their foundational documents until they are forced to, and many times when it's too late. These are legal documents that help others know what your wishes are if you are no longer able to make your needs known for yourself. We often only think that we're going to need these documents when we are older or having a planned procedure, but life comes at us fast, and any of us are a car accident, aneurysm, or even a simple fall away from needing these forms. It's best to have these forms in place in advance. And in most cases, these are legal documents, and they may vary state by state. So to make sure we're giving you the most up-to-date, best information possible, we've invited a guest along for today's episode, Attorney Rebecca Spinner. Attorney Spinner is an associate attorney at Surprenant Beneski. Surprenant Beneski specialize in elder law and estate planning, of which your foundational documents are part of. Now, Attorney Spinner has a diverse legal background and a strong history of serving vulnerable populations. She is a frequent speaker at the firm's seminars, a contributing author on their blog, and also appears at local councils on aging to meet with elders seeking advice and guidance with their estate planning. Welcome, Attorney Spinner. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's get right to it. Can you please explain to our listeners what the foundational documents are?
Absolutely. So the foundational documents are the documents that really every person from the time that they're 18 or older should have in place, regardless of whether you have $5 or $5 million in the bank. Everybody needs these documents. So that's going to be a durable power of attorney, a healthcare proxy, a HIPPA release or HIPPA authorization, an advance directive, and a last will and testament. And we're going to focus on the documents today that are surrounding the healthcare decisions.
Absolutely. So let's start with the healthcare proxy. This is one of the base forms that we talk to all of our patients about.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the healthcare proxy is the document where you say who can make medical decisions for you in the event that you could no longer make them for yourself. So if a doctor says in writing you no longer have the capacity to make your medical decisions, this document says this is who I want to make those medical decisions on my behalf. It's a really important document to have in place because if you don't have this document in place beforehand and you were to become incapacitated, somebody, whether that's a family member, a close friend, somebody is going to have to go to court and petition a court for what's called guardianship over you, which is the power to make your medical decisions. It's a very expensive process. You're typically looking at about $7,000 or $8,000 to go through that process. It's public because anybody can come forward and say, that's not who should be making medical decisions on his behalf. And ultimately, a judge is going to get to decide who's making those decisions for you. And it can be completely avoided just by having that healthcare proxy in place beforehand.
Now, you mentioned expensive, but
Very.
that doesn't sound time sensitive either. And not all medical decisions can wait. So then who makes those decisions?
Yeah, so sometimes people end up in the hospital for months on end waiting for a judge to make a decision. And it can be really, really stressful for your care team, for your family, to have to go through that court process. Sometimes you can get in there on an emergency and get things done fast, but ultimately you're at the mercy of the court in that situation. So it's so important to make sure you have this document in place beforehand, and it's really simple and easy to get it done.
Yikes. In my career, I've seen some horror shows involved with people who did not have these forms in place in the hospital. And
Absolutely.
it can be torture for everyone.
It's the last thing that your family members, loved ones, care team wants to have to deal with when you're sick. You know, when you're sick, we want to be taking care of you. We don't want to have to be going through a court process. So it's really important to get this done beforehand. And not only to make things simpler, but also to make sure you get to decide who's making those choices on your behalf. You know, you may say, I want my best friend to be my healthcare agent because I really trust her and I know that she's got a really level head. But when a court goes to pick, they're going to pick most likely your next of kin, the closest person to you. So they may pick your brother to make those healthcare decisions, and that's not what you ultimately would have wanted. So I think that's another reason why it's so important to have that document in place beforehand.
Absolutely. So how does that differ from the durable power of attorney?
Sure. So the durable power of attorney is the document where you say who can make legal and financial decisions for you if you could no longer make them for yourself. So healthcare proxy is the healthcare decisions. Power of attorney is legal and financial decisions. So, going to the bank for you, dealing with your real estate, filing your taxes, signing your name on a document. This is also a really important document to have in place beforehand, because if you don't have a durable power of attorney in place and you were to become incapacitated, it's going to be that same court process. Someone's going to have to go to court and petition a court for what's called conservatorship over you, which is the power to make your legal and financial decisions. Same cost, same, time-consuming
Right.
situation, same stress for your family. And, the court might pick, like I said, your brother to make those legal and financial decisions, and that your brother can't, save 2 pennies, and he's not the person you would necessarily want
Well,
to make those choices for you.
And while this process is going on, my house is getting foreclosed on, right? The electricity is getting shut off because I'm asleep in a bed somewhere or incapacitated in some other way, and I'm not capable to do those things for myself.
Absolutely. It can also be really important in the context of your health care. When we have somebody who needs long-term care and we're trying to qualify them for Medicaid, or Mass Health as we call it here in Massachusetts, to pay for that long-term care, and we're needing to move assets and, get prepaid funeral contracts in place, and there's nobody who has the legal authority to do that, and now we're having to go through that court process. So it really does tie back in with that health care, because if you need long-term care, and you don't have the means to pay for that care for an extended period of time, we have to be able to go through that process to get you on that program. And usually we need a power of attorney to be able to get everything done.
Yikes. It seems scary, but to not have that option as an alternative can really set you off for failure.
Absolutely. And one thing I wanted to also mention on both of the documents we've talked about, it's very important to have a primary agent on that document and at least one alternate, because unfortunately we never know what's going to happen in life. It's a really good idea to have a backup on there. It could be that the person's traveling and they're, overseas and they can't be contacted, or God forbid something happens to them and they become ill or they pass away. You always want to make sure you have a backup, because if you don't, it's in the same situation as if we didn't have these documents in the first place. We're still going to end up having to go to court.
A lot of people that I talk to like to assign their spouse or someone they live with as their healthcare proxy. And as I mentioned in my personal life, you want to have someone that's not necessarily the person that's with you all the time, because if it was something like a car accident or some other accident type situation, you both might be incapacitated.
Right.
And now we're looking for the next person.
Right.
And you
exactly.
start that same process off that we talked about earlier.
Exactly. I always say the more people you can have listed on there, the better. Obviously, you want to pick people who you really trust to make these decisions.
Sure.
But for example, on my documents, I have my spouse, then my mother, then my sister,
Right.
my mother-in-law. I made sure I have a list of people there who I trust, so that if something happens to me, I know there is somebody who will be able to step in and make those decisions.
Could you next talk a little bit about the advanced directive? Because the healthcare proxy is important, but I feel like it doesn't really have a lot of teeth unless the people who you've designated understand what you want to.
Absolutely. So the advanced directive is also sometimes referred to as the living will. So a lot of people have heard that terminology before. But this is the document where you actually say, okay, here are all the decisions I would want made for me in the event that I could no longer speak for myself. So, for example, the document that we do for folks in our office asks you all kinds of questions. Some of the more end-of-life things, like do you want artificial hydration and nutrition, pain relieving medication, resuscitation. But we also ask you things that are not necessarily end of life, but questions that would come up for somebody if they had to step into your shoes and make decisions for you on a daily basis. So, say God forbid you were to get a dementia or an Alzheimer's diagnosis, and somebody has to decide where you're going to live and how you're going to live. Are you somebody who wants to be kept at home as long as possible? Would you be okay with going into, for example, an assisted living facility? Are you more of a private person, or do you prefer to be in more of a social setting? Things that somebody else would have to decide for you on a day-to-day basis, that could be really difficult. Your spouse might know pretty well for you, but say your best friend or your child had to step in and make those decisions. The goal of this document is to make sure that that person knows the decisions you would want made so that you can really take the burden off of them from having to make those really difficult decisions.
And it's a heavy burden, right? People don't like
Absolutely.
talking about these things in a general sense. And what I think a lot of people miss when we're talking about this is that if the healthcare proxy is activated and someone's having to make these decisions for you, it's likely an intense emotional experience for them as well. And that just compounds the responsibility and the heaviness of the decisions to make.
Absolutely.
So in my personal life, I was put into a caregiver role, and it was very well defined for us what was going to happen, what was supposed to happen. And it did help alleviate a lot of stress and a lot of guilt, and we could really focus on the situation at hand.
Absolutely.
Instead of worrying about what that conversation we had with mom was 6 months ago, or that one time over drinks at dinner, or, it really keeps people from floundering and drowning out there.
And I think it can also be really helpful, maybe you were designated as the healthcare proxy, you're the primary agent, so you're the one with the legal authority. But you might have 2 other siblings, and you think one thing's best for mom, and your brother thinks something else is best for mom. But if mom put it down on paper, we can say, okay, this is what mom said she would want, and it can also help alleviate some of the family tension that can come up in these stressful situations, because ultimately there's only one decision maker at a time under the law. We can't name 2 healthcare agents together. So having that clearly outlined for your family, your loved ones, your care team, whoever is going to be making these decisions is really, really important. And it just relieves a lot of that burden. It really is, I think a burden that you can take off of your loved ones.
Well, and I'm sure most of us have experienced a situation where someone's loved one has passed on, and it destroys the family because of all the infighting and indecision and anger and resentment. So it really helps everyone involved to get these documents together.
Yeah, and I mean, just at the most basic level too, we want to make sure you're receiving the type of care that you want to receive, right? It's great to help alleviate the burden off of the family as well. But you might be somebody who has really strong religious convictions, and you say, I don't want blood transfusions. That's really important to me. We want to make sure those things are clearly defined and outlined, because if your healthcare agent doesn't know, they might not be intentionally making a decision that goes against what you would have made for yourself, but they don't know. They don't have the information. So it's just as simple as getting that down on paper beforehand.
And it doesn't take a very long time.
It doesn't. It doesn't. Having gone through it and done one yourself,
absolutely.
It may take you, some time to think about these things and go through the questions beforehand, but once it's down on paper, what a relief for you as well, right?
It is. It's an enlightening process. I'll tell you that. There were things that even working in healthcare I hadn't considered for myself. And it can be uncomfortable, but it's good to have those conversations beforehand.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of like you touched on at the very beginning, a lot of times people don't think about these things until they're much older, because they think none of these things are going to happen to me. I'm young, but anything could happen to any of us at any time.
Absolutely.
And being prepared is so incredibly important, so that we're not in a stressful situation. Your family's not scrambling to figure out what to do next.
Now, we also talk a lot with our patients about the MOLST form. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so the MOLST stands for Medical Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment, and this is a legally binding document that you fill out with your doctor. Typically, you can do it with your primary care doctor, you can do them at the hospital, but usually it's on a really bright piece of paper, like a pink form, and they tell you to put it on your fridge so, if the EMTs have to come in, that they can see it. This is a document where you can make legally binding decisions about your end-of-life care. So if you're somebody who knows, I do not ever want to be resuscitated, you can fill out this form, and as long as your doctor has it on file and the EMTs have access to it if something happens, you will not be resuscitated. It's very important that people understand the difference between the advance directive and the MOLST form, because the advance directive is not a legally binding document, which means your agent can still make whatever decision they think is best. It's meant to give them the guidance to be able to make those decisions, but it doesn't tie their hands in any way. If you have that MOLST form on file, your healthcare agent isn't going to be able to say, no, don't resuscitate her. or do resuscitate, or depending on what that form says.
Yeah.
They can't go against that form, essentially.
going
The doctor
rogue.
is going to go based on what that form says. So it's really important that if you fill out that form, you are very certain about the decision that you are making. You can always revoke it. So if you filled it out once and you change your mind, you can always get rid of it. But once it's filled out, if you don't revoke it or ask your doctor to, rip it up, that document is in place and it is legally binding. That is what the doctor is going to do.
And that is one of the differences between the MOLST and I believe even the durable power of attorney or the healthcare proxy is the MOLST is initiated right when you sign it.
Correct.
Right? Whereas
Yeah.
the other two documents, something has to change in your life for those to be evoked.
So for the healthcare proxy, that is true. So a durable power of attorney actually works right away. You don't have to be incapacitated for it to be used. So the reason for that is a few things. I think as a healthcare professional, I'm sure you know, capacity can be very fluid. Somebody might have capacity in the morning and then sundown and not be able to make decisions at night. When somebody brings that power of attorney into the bank, if you have a power of attorney that only works when you're incapacitated, the bank wants to know in that moment that that person is walking in the door that the principal on the power of attorney no longer has capacity. We find practically those are really difficult to use. So for most of our clients, we do what's called a durable power of attorney, which means this document works right away. However, that doesn't mean we give it to the agent right away to be used. So for example, in our office, we offer to hold the originals for our client, and we'll only release it in the event they ask for it, they tell us to release it to their agent, or if we get something in writing from their doctor saying that they're incapacitated. So it works right away, but it doesn't necessarily have to be used right away. The reason why you might want it to be used is, say you have to go in for surgery on your knee and you and your wife decided to sell your house and you want her to be able to go to the closing for you to sign the closing paperwork. You may want her to have the original to go be able to do that on your behalf. Or maybe somebody's getting older and it's getting more difficult for them to get out of the house. They want their child to go to the bank for them or to deal with their taxes. So there are reasons why you might want that document to be used beforehand, but for most people, they're not having their agent use it unless it's needed.
I'd like to get one of those forms so I don't have to go to the bank. That would be very nice. Make my wife do it. Now, there was one more form that you had mentioned, the HIPAA form.
Yes.
What is that about?
Yeah, so most people are familiar with HIPAA. HIPAA is the federal law that says all your medical information is protected, which means nobody can just talk to your doctors or get your medical records or even deal with your health insurance on a bill. However, if you're in, say, the hospital, something happens, you're in an accident, there might be people that you want to be able to find out what's going on with you. You may want your spouse or your children or your brother to be able to call, get the result of a test, speak with your doctor about what's going on with you. The HIPAA release or HIPAA authorization is not a legally binding document where they can make decisions for you. It's not a decision-making document.
Just informational.
It's just information gathering. And the great thing about the HIPAA that we do for folks is it's something called a universal HIPAA release, which means it goes with you anywhere you go. So any doctor's office, hospital, you're traveling out of state, it'll work wherever you go. But I think even more importantly, it works for a year after you've passed away. The reason why that becomes important is, God forbid there's a medical malpractice situation and your family needs to get your records, or a health insurance bill comes in after you've already passed and your family's trying to deal with it. If you don't have this HIPAA release that outlives you, someone's going to have to go to court and petition a court to get access to your records. So as you can see, a lot of what we're trying to do with these foundational documents is avoid any sort of court process, because it's time consuming, it's expensive, and it can be avoided just by having these documents in place beforehand.
Right. And I tell people all the time, especially my teenagers, you want to try to foresee the problems coming and take care of those ahead of time, because there's going to be plenty of things that come up that you can't foresee and you can't plan for. So at least if we can get these documents together, you're covered in most areas.
Yeah, and just one last thing to add, just because you mentioned your teenagers, something that a lot of people don't realize is when your child turns 18, they are now legal adults and you no longer have any ability to make decisions on their behalf. and that child goes away to college.
Yes.
And you're trying to call the university and deal with something on their behalf. They won't
Nope.
speak to you.
I've run into that.
What we do is we do what's called a college package for our kids who are just turned 18, up until their early 20s, where we do a durable power of attorney, a healthcare proxy, and a HIPAA, so that if you go away, mom and dad will still be able to help you with things.
Yeah, and have some input.
And that's kind of another place where that durable power of attorney can come in handy. You probably want mom and dad to deal with the, bill at the school for you, to help you with your banking. Those things can be really helpful. But I think a lot of times people forget, you think this is my child, but your child turns 18 and they're an adult. So it's important to make sure they have those documents as well. This is for everybody 18 and older, really.
Yeah, that's a good tip. Because like I said in the beginning, most of us only think about this kind of thing as being a decision for later in life. But this can really help you all the way through.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I'm sure our listeners get a lot out of the discussion.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, thank you, Attorney Spinner. I think our listeners will learn a lot from all of the great information you provided us this week. So remember, folks, foundational documents are most effective when prepared in advance. So give them a call over at Surprenant and Beneski. Go to the mass.gov website or even Google it if you have to. But do not hesitate. Get it done. You will feel better knowing that if the worst happens, your needs will be considered and your family and friends will know what to do. So remember, when it's time to choose a home care provider, choose Community Nurse of Fairhaven and we'll get you through. And as always, let us know how you like the podcast by leaving comments where available. Also, please don't forget to follow us on the socials. Thank you for joining us on Your Care, Your Choice. We hope you'll check out our next episode coming soon anywhere you download your podcasts. So until next time, let's all try to do a little better together each and every day.